The sun bled out over the Arizona territory, painting the rocky crags in shades of rust and old bruises. In that dying light, a man they called Hard Apache moved like a shadow between the canyon walls. He wasn't Apache, not by blood. The name was a story in itself, earned in a past he never discussed, a testament to a life lived on the harsh edges of the frontier. He was a man carved from the same stone as the desert, all grim silence and watchful eyes, a solitary figure in a land that rewarded solitude and punished weakness. He was headed nowhere in particular, which was exactly where he preferred to be, until the sound of trouble split the evening quiet. It wasn't a gunshot, but the desperate, raw sound of a woman's cry, choked off short, followed by the rough laughter of men. Hard Apache didn't consider himself a hero. Heroes had homes and people to mourn them. He had a horse, a rifle, and a clear understanding of how the world worked. Yet something in that cut-off cry, a fear so sharp it carried on the thin mountain air, rooted him to the spot. He melted against the sandstone, becoming just another part of the landscape, and looked down into the shallow basin below. 3 men on lathered horses had a lone wagon cornered. One of them had a woman by the arm, her bonnet torn away, hair the color of wheat in a firestorm tumbling loose. She fought, not with screams now, but with a fierce, silent struggling that was more dangerous. He could see it in the set of her jaw, even from a distance. This wasn't some wilting flower from a storybook. This was a cornered animal, and cornered animals bite. The men, dressed in the rough garb of hired guns, were enjoying it, circling her like coyotes. One leaned in, his words a low murmur lost to the wind, but his intent was as clear as the pistol on his hip. They weren't just after the wagon's supplies. They were after her. Hard Apache's hand rested on the worn stock of his rifle. This was none of his business. Getting involved was a sure way to find a bullet with your name on it, or worse, to inherit someone else's problems. He watched as the lead man, a brute with a scar down his cheek, backhanded the woman hard. Her head snapped back, but she didn't fall. She spat in the dust at his feet. That single act of defiance, small and hopeless as it was, decided things. Maybe it was the waste of it. Maybe it was the echo of a different life, long buried. He never put a name to the reason. He just raised the rifle, the crack of the shot a single, sharp period in the canyon's silence. The scarred man dropped, clutching his shoulder. The other 2 wheeled around, guns drawn, searching the high rocks. Hard Apache fired again, not to hit, but to sing the air next to a second man's ear. The message was clear. He could pick them off from where he stood. With curses and a flurry of wasted shots in his general direction, they hauled their wounded leader onto a horse and fled, leaving a cloud of dust and unfinished business behind. For a long minute there was only the sound of the wind and the woman's ragged breathing. Hard Apache descended the slope, a looming dark figure against the purple sky. She stood her ground, wiping blood from her lip, her eyes wide but dry. She looked young, but her eyes were old with recent fear. She took in his appearance, the frayed buckskin, the face that hadn't known a gentle touch in years, the eyes that gave away nothing. "They'll be back," she said, her voice steadier than he expected. It wasn't a question. He just nodded, scanning the horizon. He couldn't leave her here. The thought settled in him like a stone. He gestured with his head toward the deeper canyons, the maze of rock only he knew. Got a place. Not far. He didn't offer his name, and she didn't ask. She just looked from him to the empty trail where the men had vanished, then back at his impassive face. Without a word, she climbed back onto the wagon seat, gathering the reins of her spooked team. He led her through twisting stone passages as night fell completely, guiding the wagon where no wagon should have been able to go, to a hidden cave behind a waterfall of rock. It was a dry, sheltered space, used by hunters and hermits for 100 years. He got a small fire going, the smoke finding a hidden fissure in the ceiling. In the flickering light he saw her properly. She was maybe in her early 20s, dressed in practical, worn traveling clothes, but there was a refined edge to her, a careful way of moving that spoke of a different upbringing. She tended to the cut on her lip with water from her canteen, her hands shaking only slightly. Over a meal of hardtack and jerky, the silence stretched. He was used to silence. It was his native tongue. But hers felt different, charged with unspoken things. Finally she spoke, staring into the flames. "They work for a man, a cattle baron. My father owed him money. When my father died, the man decided I was the payment." She said it flatly, as if reciting a terrible but familiar fact. "I was running. Didn't run fast enough." Hard Apache poked the fire with a stick. Debts, greed, a woman treated as property, it was an old, ugly story in these parts. He'd heard variations of it a dozen times. "They'll track the wagon," he said. "Come morning, I'll lead them on a chase north. You stay here 2 days, then head east. Find the railroad crew." She looked up at him then, the firelight catching in her eyes. "You do that? Draw them off for a stranger?" He met her gaze, his own unreadable. "Ain't about you. It's about the trouble. Easier to lead it away." She seemed to consider this, then nodded slowly, accepting the harsh logic of it. The night deepened around them, the canyon holding its breath. He took the first watch, listening to the soft sounds of her sleep, the occasional hitch in her breath from the day's horrors. He planned the false trail in his mind, the gullies and ridges he'd use. Dawn came, pale and cold. He was saddling his horse when she emerged from the cave. She had repacked her few belongings, but made no move to prepare the wagon. She just stood there, hands clasped in front of her, looking at him with that same directness. "I'm not going," she said. Her voice was quiet, but it cut through the morning chill like a blade. He stopped, cinching the saddle strap. "The railroad." "I know where the railroad is," she interrupted. "Those men know I'd head there, too. It's the first place they'll look." She took a step closer. "You said yourself this place is hidden. I can stay, I can be quiet. I can pull my weight." He shook his head, a slow, stubborn movement. "Ain't a place for a woman. Ain't a life." "The life out there," she said, jerking her chin toward the open desert, "is a death sentence for me. You saw them. You know what they'll do?" She held his gaze, and he saw the defiance from the canyon return, hardened now into a cold, determined resolve. "I am not going. You can try to make me, but I will find my way back here, or I will die trying. My choice." The words hung between them, a challenge and a plea all at once. Hard Apache looked at the stubborn, bruised woman who refused the escape he was offering. She was trouble, the kind that sticks and doesn't let go. He could ride away right now. He should, but he saw the truth in her eyes. She meant it. She would die on principle, just to spite the fate the world had handed her. In the distance, so faint it might have been the wind, came the sound of a dislodged stone clattering down a slope. It was too deliberate. They were out there already, searching, patient as wolves. He stood frozen, his hand on the saddle horn, the plan for his clean escape crumbling to dust. The woman didn't flinch at the sound. She just watched him, waiting for his decision, her future, and suddenly, inexplicably, his own balanced on the knife's edge of that canyon silence. The hunters were closing in, and the hidden bride he never wanted was refusing to run. The sound of the stone was a cold finger down Hard Apache's spine. It wasn't the wind. The wind didn't send pebbles rolling in a careful, searching pattern. His eyes, the color of flint, locked onto the woman's. In them he saw no surprise, only a grim confirmation. She had expected this. The silence that followed was thick, charged with the unspoken understanding that the walls of his sanctuary had been breached. He let go of the saddle horn, the leather creaking softly. With a slow, deliberate movement, he raised a finger to his lips. She gave a single, sharp nod. He moved to the cave entrance, not at the main opening, but to a narrow crack in the rock he used as a lookout. Pressing himself against the cold stone, he peered out into the world of sharp morning light and long, deceptive shadows. The basin below looked empty, still holding the purple shade of night in its depths. But his eyes, trained by a lifetime of looking for things that didn't want to be seen, picked out the irregularities. A patch of scrub that didn't quite match its neighbors. The faint, unnatural stillness of a juniper bush. They were out there, at least 2 of them, maybe all 3 if the wounded one was stubborn. They were moving slow, methodical, reading the ground. They had found the wagon tracks, lost them in the rocky creek bed, and were now fanning out, searching for where a desperate man might hide a woman and a rig. He stepped back from the crack. The woman stood exactly where he had left her, her hands now clenched at her sides, but her posture straight. She watched him, waiting for a command, a plan, anything. He pointed to the very back of the cave, where the shadows were deepest. "Sit! Don't move! Don't make a sound." His voice was a whisper so low it was more felt than heard. She obeyed, melting into the darkness, becoming just another shape in the rock. Hard Apache turned his attention to the interior. The fire was long dead, only cold ash. He scattered it with his boot, then kicked a layer of dust over the spot. Their few supplies, the canteen, the empty jerky sack, he shoved into a crevice high up on the wall. He led his horse, a wary dun gelding, deeper into the cave's recess where the animal would be out of sight and, with luck, would stay quiet. He ran a calming hand down its neck, then returned to the center of the space. It looked as barren and unlived in as it had for decades. It would have to be enough. He chose his own position not at the entrance, but to the side of it, where a bulge of rock offered cover and a narrow field of fire toward the approach. He crouched, rifle resting across his knees, and became as still as the stone around him. The only sound was the slow, steady drip of water somewhere in the darkness behind him and the beat of his own heart in his ears. He didn't look at the woman. He focused his entire being on the slice of outside world he could see through the crack. Time stretched, thin and brittle. A lizard skittered across the sand in front of the cave, then froze. A minute later, it darted away. That was the sign. Someone was close. Hard Apache's finger found the trigger guard of his rifle. He breathed in, slow, and out, slower. A boot scraped on gravel, just outside. A shadow fell across the entrance, blotting out the morning light. The man was being cautious, standing to the side, not foolish enough to step right into the mouth of a potential gun barrel. Hard Apache could see the tip of a boot, the worn leather of a trouser leg. "Hello in the cave!" The voice was rough, trying for a tone of friendly reason but layered with a mean tension. It wasn't the voice of the scarred leader. This was one of the others. "We ain't here for trouble. We're just looking for our boss's property, a woman, you might have seen her. Got herself lost." Silence was the only answer. Hard Apache didn't blink. "We know you're in there," the voice tried again, a little harder now. "We seen the tracks this far. We just want the girl. You can walk away clean. Nobody has to get hurt over some banker's daughter." Banker's daughter, the words hung in the dusty air. So that was it. Not just a cattle baron's debt, but a fallen man of money. His assets, including his flesh and blood, being collected. Hard Apache's mind worked, piecing together the fragments. It made her defiance make a different kind of sense. She wasn't just fighting men. She was fighting being turned into a transaction. The man outside shifted his weight. Hard Apache could almost feel his impatience, his nervousness. They knew someone was in here. The question was whether it was one man or two, and how armed. The temptation to rush the cave would be warring with the fear of a bullet in the gut. "Last chance," the voice barked, all pretense of friendliness gone. "Send her out, or we're coming in to get her." From the deep shadows at the back of the cave, there was the faintest intake of breath, a tiny, caught sound of fear. The man outside heard it too. His shadow moved, turning, likely signaling to his partner. The game was up. Hard Apache made his choice. He didn't fire. Firing would pin them down, start a siege they couldn't win with limited ammunition and no back door. Instead, he spoke, letting his voice rumble out from the darkness, low and flat and carrying the weight of countless empty spaces. "You take one step inside," he said, "and the first man dies. The second man gets to watch his partner die before he follows him. You want that for your wages?" The silence from outside was different now. It was the silence of recalculating. They had expected a panicked farmer, maybe a lone prospector. They hadn't expected a voice that held no fear, only a cold promise. "Who are you?" the man finally asked, suspicion warring with a dawning caution. "I'm the man between you and what you came for," Hard Apache replied. "And I'm telling you to turn around. Tell your boss the trail went cold. Tell him the desert took her. It's the only story that lets you ride away." A muttered conversation happened just out of sight, too low to hear. Then the lead voice came back. "This ain't over. He wants her bad." "You've just bought yourself a world of pain, mister. We'll be back with more men. You can't sit in that hole forever." The shadow retreated. The boots scraped again, fading this time. Hard Apache didn't move. He stayed crouched, listening, for a full 10 minutes after the last sound faded. He listened to the birds cautiously resume their songs, to the normal sigh of the wind through the canyon. Only then did he slowly stand, his joints protesting the long stillness. The woman emerged from the shadows. The morning light from the entrance caught her face. She was pale, but her eyes were dry and fierce. She had heard it all. "Banker's daughter," he said, not a question. She looked away, wrapping her arms around herself. "My father, he thought he could play their game. He borrowed from men who don't deal in paper, they deal in blood. When the bank failed in Silver City, he took his own life. He left a letter. It said the debt was cleared with his death." A bitter, hollow sound escaped her, not quite a laugh. "The man he owed, a rancher named Cutter, didn't see it that way. He came to the house, said the debt transferred to me. A practical arrangement, he called it." She looked back at Hard Apache, her gaze direct. "I was not a practical arrangement. I was my father's daughter. So I took what was left, that old wagon, a strong horse, a little money he'd hidden, and I ran. I got 3 days head start. They'd been hunting me for a week." Hard Apache walked to the entrance, scanning the basin carefully. They were gone for now. But they would be back, and with more numbers, just as the man said. This cave was no longer a hiding place. It was a trap. "Cutter," he said, turning the name over. He'd heard it. "A big spread north of Tucson. A man with a reputation for getting what he wanted and burying what got in his way. This wasn't just a stray problem anymore. This was a war with a named enemy, and he was standing in the middle of it with a woman who was its prize. "Why'd you really stay?" he asked her, his back still to her. "You heard him. You know the railroad is a gamble." "But there are other towns, other territories." "You could vanish." He heard her footsteps on the stone as she came to stand a few feet behind him. "And go where? Do what?" "With no name, no money, no protection. I'd be jumping from one kind of trouble to another." "At least this trouble," she said, and he could hear the stubborn set of her jaw in her voice, "is clear. And you didn't hand me over. You could have. It would have been the easiest thing." He finally turned to face her. The full light showed the bruise on her cheek, the determined set of her mouth. She was a city girl, but the desert was etching itself onto her fast. "Easy ain't always right," he muttered, an old, almost forgotten phrase rising to his lips. "No," she agreed softly. "It isn't, so let me stay. Let me help. I can't shoot like you, but I can follow orders. I can keep watch. I can make a plan that isn't just running. My father taught me numbers, ledgers. I can think, and I know Cutter. I know the way his mind works. That has to be worth something." He looked at her, this unexpected complication. She was offering a partnership of a sort. He, who had partnered with no one but his horse for more years than he cared to count. The sensible thing was to ride out tonight, leave her with the wagon, let fate take its course. But the memory of her spitting in the dust, of her refusing to be a transaction, stuck in him like a burr. "We can't stay here," he said finally, the words a concession. "They know this spot. We need to move deeper, someplace they can't bring horses. Someplace they'd have to come at us single file." A flicker of relief crossed her face, quickly schooled into resolve. "Where?" He looked past her, into the high, broken country beyond the canyon. "A place, a day's hard walk. The wagon stays. We take what we can carry on our backs." He paused, studying her. "It'll be rough." "No turning back." She met his look without flinching. "I turned my back the moment I left that house. There's nothing to go back to." As they gathered the meager supplies, ammunition, the canteen, a bedroll, a small sack of beans, a new tension settled in the cave. It wasn't just the fear of pursuit anymore. It was the weight of a shared path, chosen in the shadow of a gun. He didn't know her name, she didn't know his. They were just two people, one running from a past of debt and disgrace, the other from a past he never spoke of, now tied together by the simple, dangerous fact of her refusal to go. The canyon outside was quiet, but the silence was a lie. Somewhere out there, a man named Cutter was gathering his riders, and the hard, empty land between here and safety just got a whole lot smaller. The decision to abandon the cave settled between them like a physical thing. Hard Apache worked with a quiet, efficient speed, his movements economical and sure. He divided the beans, gave her the lighter bedroll, kept most of the ammunition. He hesitated over his spare pistol, a worn Colt Navy, then held it out to her, but first. She looked at it, then at his face. "Do you know how to use it?" he asked, his voice low. She shook her head, a quick, tight motion. "My father believed firearms were for hired help." A ghost of something, maybe disgust, maybe pity, flickered in his eyes. "It ain't for belief, it's for living. You point the end with the hole at what you need to stop. You pull the trigger, it kicks. Don't close your eyes." He placed it in her hands. It was heavier than she expected, the metal cool. "Keep it in your belt. Don't use it unless you have to. Mostly, it's to make you feel less like a rabbit." The word stung, but she nodded, securing the gun awkwardly in the waistband of her skirt. It dragged the fabric down, an alien and uncomfortable weight. She watched as he pushed the wagon farther back into the cave, scattering brush over its traces. It was like watching a man bury a corpse. That wagon was her last tie to the life before, to the father who had failed her, to any semblance of normalcy. Its loss felt final in a way nothing else had. They left as the sun climbed, turning the canyon into an oven. He led not on a path, but through a labyrinth of rock, choosing routes that left no track on stone. She followed, her city boots slipping on gravel, her breath coming in short gasps as they scaled a steep, crumbling ridge. She did not complain. She focused on the back of his buckskin shirt, on placing her feet where his had been, on the simple, burning need to keep moving. The physical pain was a distraction from the larger fear, and she welcomed it. By midday they were in a high, broken country of pinyon and jagged bluffs. He finally stopped in the thin shade of a rock overhang, handing her the canteen. She drank sparingly, then offered it back. He took a small sip, his eyes constantly scanning the terrain below. "This cutter," he said, not looking at her. "He want you just to settle a debt, or is there more?" She wiped her mouth with the back of her hand. "There's always more. My father's bank held the mortgage on a parcel of land cutter once, a water-rich section next to his northern pasture. With my father gone and the bank collapsed, the title is messy. If Cutter has me, if we are married, his claim to that land becomes stronger in the eyes of the territory. It's not just about me, it's about the water." He gave a slow nod. It made a ruthless kind of sense. In this land, water was a better currency than gold. A man could build an empire on it or kill for it. Cutter was doing both. "So you're a key to a lock on a spring." "I suppose I am," she said, the bitterness returning. "A very unwilling key." He was quiet for a long time, his gaze fixed on a distant dust devil spiraling into the pale sky. "He won't stop. Not for a key that valuable. I know, and you still won't run east." She met his eyes. "Running only works if you can run forever. I can't. You saw them. They're trackers. They're persistent. I'd be looking over my shoulder for the rest of my life. At least here, the fight is clear. The enemy has a name." He seemed to turn the idea over, examining it like a strange stone. "Most folks' instinct was to flee. Hers was to dig in, even in barren soil. It was a courage he understood, even if it came from a different place than his own. His came from having nothing left to lose. Hers, he sensed, came from having lost everything except the will to say no." They moved on. As they walked, a strange, silent partnership began to form. He would point to a distant landmark, a twin-peaked butte, a lightning-blasted pine, and she would commit it to memory. He showed her how to step on rock instead of sand, how to listen for the change in sound that meant a loose slope. She asked few questions, but her eyes were always watching, learning. She was smart, he realized. She didn't just see the desert. She was trying to understand its grammar. Meanwhile, far to the north in the sprawling adobe ranch house of the Cutter spread, the man himself received the news. He was a big man, gone soft in the middle, but with hard eyes the color of a winter creek. He listened as the scarred gunman, his arm bandaged, made his report. "It ain't just some drifter, boss. This fella, he's different. Talks like he's already buried a dozen men. He's holed up in the Badlands south of the old mission." "Has the girl?" Cutter leaned back in his leather chair, steepling his fingers. He wasn't angry. Anger was for small minds. He was calculating. A man with a reputation? Didn't get a name. But the way he moved. "Some of the boys think he might be that fella they call Hard Apache, a loner, got a name for being troublesome." A slow smile spread across Cutter's face. It wasn't a pleasant sight. Hard Apache, I've heard the name. A ghost story for sheep herders. Perfect. He stood up, walking to a map pinned to the wall. He's chosen to protect my property. That makes him a thief. And we hang thieves. He traced a line on the map with a thick finger. I don't want a siege. I want a message sent. You take 8 men, you find them. You bring me the girl, unharmed. You bring me this Apache's head. Nail it to a post on the boundary of that spring section. Let everyone know what happens when you take what's mine. Back in the high country, as dusk began to pool in the canyons, Hard Apache found the place he'd been looking for. It was a narrow cleft in the face of a cliff, almost invisible until you were upon it, leading back to a small, sheltered pocket with a seep of water that collected in a stone basin. A high, overhanging roof made it defensible. A single man could hold the entrance for a long time. Here, he said simply. She looked at the sparse space, the wall of rock at her back, the long drop to the canyon floor in front. It felt less like a refuge and more like a castle keep, a place for a last stand. The reality of their situation pressed down on her, heavier than the pistol in her belt. This was it. This was where she would make her fight, with a man who was a stranger, against an enemy she could not hope to defeat. He gathered dry wood for a small, hidden fire, just enough to heat a few beans in a tin cup. The night closed in, cold and vast, the stars sharp and indifferent. They ate in silence. The canyon wind sang a lonely tune through the rocks. Finally she spoke, her voice small in the immense dark. "Why are you doing this, really?" He poked at the tiny fire with a stick, sending up a shower of sparks that died before they reached the ceiling. He had asked himself the same question all day. "Had a sister once," he said, the words coming out rough as if unused. "Long time ago, men came, took her. Wasn't anything I could do about it then?" He looked up, and the firelight etched deep lines into his face. "Ain't nothing I can do about it now, but maybe I can do something about it today." She understood then. She wasn't just a key to a spring. To him, in some broken way, she was a chance to answer an old, silent scream from his past. Their alliance was built on more than just circumstance. It was built on twin ghosts, her father's failure and his sister's memory. "I'm sorry," she said, and meant it. He just shrugged, a movement that seemed to carry the weight of the years. "Don't be." "It just is." He stood, picking up his rifle. "Get some sleep. I'll take first watch." "They won't come in the dark, not in this country." "But they'll come with the sun." She lay down on the hard ground, the borrowed bedroll thin beneath her. Sleep felt impossible. She listened to his quiet movements at the mouth of the cleft, a solid, dark shape against the lesser dark of the night sky. The fear was still there, a cold knot in her stomach. But under it something else was taking root, a grim resolve. She had pulled this man into her storm. The least she could do was face it with him, whatever that meant. As the first faint gray light began to bleed into the eastern sky, far below their perch, a single rider, moving fast and low on his horse, approached the base of the bluffs. He was a scout, one of Cutter's best. He had found the abandoned cave, read the sign of their exit, and followed the nearly invisible trail up into the high rocks. Now he dismounted, studying the ground. He saw the faint scuff where a boot had slipped on a scramble. He saw a single pinion needle, broken fresh and lying on stone. He looked up, his eyes tracing the impossible cliffs. A slow, satisfied smile touched his lips. He had them. He mounted up and turned his horse, riding hard back to where 8 men waited with coiled ropes and ready rifles. The hunt was over. The siege was about to begin. The gray light found Hard Apache first, a cold wash that picked out the lines of his face as he watched the canyon below. He hadn't slept. Sleep was a luxury he had shed years ago, like a heavy coat in the desert sun. The woman slept fitfully behind him, her breathing a quiet, uneven rhythm against the rock. He had heard the scout in the pre-dawn stillness, not the man himself, but the small betrayal of the land, the too quiet moment when the night insects stopped their song. He knew they were pinned. The cleft was a good defensive position, but it was also a cage with only one way out. He let her sleep until the sun crested the distant ridges, painting the world in sharp, cruel relief. Then he moved, a slight shift of his weight, and she was instantly awake, her eyes wide and clear. She saw it in his posture, in the way his hand rested on the rifle stock. "They're here," she said, a statement, not a question. He gave a single nod. "Down below. Scout found our trail. They're gathering." He handed her the tin cup with the last of the water. "Drink," she did, the water tasting of metal and dust. The finality of the morning was a cold stone in her chest. "What's the plan?" "There's no plan," he said, his voice flat. "We wait. They have to come up. That path," he gestured to the narrow, twisting approach, "only fits one man at a time. We make it cost them. When they've had enough, they might try to starve us out. Or smoke us out." He looked at the overhang. Smoke might work. The simplicity of it was terrifying. A bottleneck, a body count. I'll hope that their nerve would break before his ammunition did. And then? He finally looked at her, and in his eyes she saw no false comfort, only a hard truth. "Then we see." A shout echoed up from the canyon floor, bouncing off the rock walls, distorted and ugly. "Hard Apache? That you up there? Cutter sends his regards." It was a different voice, loud and confident. "He's made an offer. Send the woman down. You walk away. A clean deal. You keep your scalp." Hard Apache didn't answer. He positioned himself behind a natural parapet of stone at the cleft's entrance, adjusting the angle of his rifle. The woman crouched beside him, her back against the cold wall. She pulled the heavy pistol from her belt, her hands trembling only slightly. "They're lying," she whispered. "I know." Minutes stretched, thin and hot. A fly buzzed, landed on the rock near his hand, and took off again. The tension was a wire pulled tight, singing a silent, high-pitched note that vibrated in the teeth. Then, a scraping of boot leather on stone. They were coming. The first man was cautious, using the cover of the switchback path. Only the crown of his hat appeared, then vanished. Hard Apache didn't fire, waste of a bullet. The second time the hat appeared, it was followed by a quick, searching glance, a glimpse of a sweaty, nervous face. The man ducked back. They were testing, probing his patience. The third time, the man tried to rush, coming around the bend low and fast with a pistol in his hand. Hard Apache's shot was a single, flat crack that tore the silence apart. The man cried out, stumbling back and disappearing from view. A groan floated up, then was hastily silenced. They dragged him back. A low, furious conversation bubbled up from below. "One," Hard Apache said quietly, his eyes never leaving the path. The woman clutched the pistol, her knuckles white. The sound of the shot, the finality of it, the human sound of pain, it was all suddenly, awfully real. This wasn't a story. This was blood on sun-baked rock. The response was not another rush, but a bullet. It smacked into the stone above their heads, sending a spray of sharp fragments down, then another, and another. They were firing blind from covered positions below, hoping for a lucky shot or to keep his head down. Hard Apache didn't flinch. He knew the angles. The rock around them was pocked with impacts, the air sharp with the smell of spent gunpowder and shattered stone. The barrage stopped as suddenly as it began. A new voice called up, smoother, colder. "You think you're the only one who can wait? We got all the water in the world down here. You got a teacup, we can sit a week, a month. You'll come down parched and crazy, or we'll fry you out like a badger in a hole. Your choice." The threat of smoke was real. They could build a fire at the base of the path, fan the smoke up into the cleft. It wouldn't be quick, but it would be certain. Hard Apache's mind worked cold and clear. The man was right about time. He was wrong about everything else. He looked at the woman, her face pale but set. "You said you knew how Cutter thinks." She blinked, pulling her mind from the immediacy of the gunfire. "Yes. He wants that land. The water. Would he ride out here himself, to see it done?" She thought, her father's lessons on the man's pride and greed coming back. Yes, if he was sure. If he thought the victory was at hand, he'd want to see it. To put his brand on it. A grim idea, desperate and thin as a razor, began to form in Hard Apache's mind. This wasn't about holding out. This was about changing the game. The men below were tools. Cutter was the hand that held them. You didn't fight the tools. You went for the hand. "We need him to come," he said, so low she had to lean in to hear. "We need him right down there." "How?" She breathed, her eyes searching his. "We make it personal. We make it a challenge he can't ignore. And we make him think he's already won. He outlined it quickly, the words clipped. It was a gamble that leaned on her performance, on Cutter's arrogance, and on a moment of sheer, violent chaos. It meant risking the only ground they had. It meant stepping into the open. Her face went even paler, but she listened, her jaw tightening with each passing second. When he finished, she looked down at the pistol in her hand, then back at the narrow path where death waited. She thought of a lifetime of running, of being a key, a prize, a piece of property. This was different. This was choosing the shape of the fight. Okay, she said. The word was a rock dropped into a still pool. He took a deep breath, the first sign of real feeling she'd seen in him all morning. It looked like regret and something like respect. Then he raised his voice, calling down to the unseen men below, his tone laced with a scorn that carried on the dry air. You tell Cutter he's a coward, hiding behind hired guns. He wants what's his? Let him come and take it. Let him look me in the eye. Or is he just a fat rancher who's only tough with bankers and women? Silence from below. Then the smooth voice came back, amused. He ain't coming for you, fool. The woman stood up. Hard Apache's hand shot out to pull her down, but she stepped clear, into the open mouth of the cleft where she could be seen from below. Her heart hammered against her ribs so hard she felt sick. She raised her chin, forcing her voice not to shake. You tell Mr. Cutter, she called down, the words ringing with a defiance she dredged from the very depths of her fear, that I will throw myself off this cliff before I let one of his hired hands touch me. You hear me? If he wants his property in one piece, he needs to come and make the trade himself. His men back off, he comes up alone to talk terms. Otherwise, he gets nothing but a corpse and a dry spring. She stood there, exposed, for 3 long heartbeats before Hard Apache yanked her back into cover. A bullet whined off the rock where her head had been. But the message was delivered. A different kind of silence settled below, a speculative one. They were arguing. She had spoken the only language a man like Cutter understood, leverage and pride. The threat of losing the prize altogether and the challenge to his manhood. An hour passed, the sun climbed higher, baking the rock. Then the sound of many horses arrived, a distant drumming that grew into a steady thunder. A dust cloud appeared down canyon. A group of riders, a dozen or more, with a big man on a stout bay horse at the center. He rode right up to the base of the bluffs, his men fanning out around him. Even from this distance, they could see the expensively cut jacket, the air of command. Cutter had come? He looked up, shading his eyes against the sun. His voice, when it came, was a deep, confident boom that filled the space. You up there, I admire your spirit, girl. But this foolishness ends now. You come down, we forget this trouble. Your friend can ride out. My word on it, Hard Apache called back, his voice stripped of all emotion. Your word's worth less than the dirt she stands on? You want to talk? You come up, alone, unarmed, your men stay where we can see them. Cutter laughed, a rich, booming sound that held no humor. You think I'm a fool? I think you're a man who wants something, Hard Apache countered. And I'm the man who can break it before you get it. Your choice, talk or lose it all. Cutter stared up at the cleft, his face unreadable at this distance. The calculus of greed and risk was happening behind his eyes. He had the numbers, he had the time, but he also had a stubborn key that threatened to melt in the fire. And a man who seemed to have no fear of it. To send his men up would guarantee a bloodbath and possibly the girl's death, to go up himself. It was a risk, but with his men covering the only exit, what could one ragged frontiersman and a banker's daughter really do? He dismounted, handed his reins to a man, and unbuckled his gun belt, laying it across his saddle. He made a show of it for his men and for those watching from above. He was the big man, fearless, coming to collect what was his. All right, Cutter shouted, starting up the path. Hard Apache watched him come, every step bringing the source of all this trouble closer. The woman crouched beside him, her breath coming in short, sharp gasps. The weight of the pistol was a burning brand against her skin. This was it. The hand was walking right into the trap. But the trap was made of lies and desperation, and below, 8 armed men had their rifles trained on the spot where they hid, waiting for the slightest wrong move. The wire of tension, pulled taut all morning, was now vibrating so hard it felt ready to snap the world in two. Cutter climbed with the slow, deliberate confidence of a man who owned the ground beneath his feet. His face, red from sun and exertion, came into view first, then his broad shoulders, his expensive shirt damp with sweat. He reached the top of the path and stood at the entrance to the cleft, filling the space with his presence. His eyes, pale and shrewd, swept over Hard Apache, then settled on the woman. A smile touched his lips, a politician's smile, all empty reassurance. "Well now," he said, his voice a little breathless but still holding its boom, "here we are. You've led a merry chase, young lady. Caused me a great deal of expense." He spread his hands, showing they were empty. "But that's all over." "Time to come home." The woman said nothing. She stood beside Hard Apache, her body rigid, the pistol hidden in the folds of her skirt. Hard Apache kept his rifle low, but his finger was on the trigger. Cutter's eyes noted the weapon, dismissed it. His own men had the drop from below. "You said talk?" Cutter said, shifting his gaze to Hard Apache. "So talk. What's your price to walk away?" "Everyone has a price. Mine's simple," Hard Apache said, his voice a low rumble. "You turn around, you ride out, you forget she exists." "You forget that spring exists?" Cutter chuckled, a dry, rustling sound. "Not a chance. That water is the future of my operation. And she," he nodded toward the woman, "is the legal key. A marriage license settles the title dispute nice and clean. It's just business." He took a half step forward. "Now, I'm being civil. My men down there are getting impatient. You give her to me, you ride north. I won't pursue. That's my final offer." This was the moment, the gamble. Hard Apache had counted on Cutter's arrogance, his belief that he was the biggest beast in any canyon. He gave a small, almost imperceptible nod to the woman. She moved, not away but forward, one step toward Cutter. Her movement was unexpected, and his eyes locked onto her, his politician's smile fading into confusion. In that split second of diverted attention, Hard Apache dropped. Not to fire, but to slam the butt of his rifle against a specific, precariously balanced boulder that was part of the cleft's natural doorway. It wasn't a large rock, but it was the keystone in a loose pile of debris they had spent the last hour quietly preparing. With a grinding groan, the pile gave way. Stone and dirt cascaded down, not toward Cutter, but across the narrow entrance of the cleft, creating a sudden, dusty barrier that blocked the view from the riflemen below. It wouldn't hold for long, but it would hold for long enough. Cutter stumbled back, coughing, his confidence shattered by the sudden collapse. "What in hell?" Hard Apache was already up, the rifle now leveled squarely at Cutter's chest. "Business just changed," he said. From below, shouts of alarm erupted. A single shot rang out, smacking harmlessly into the new pile of rubble. They couldn't see. They couldn't fire without risking their boss. Cutter's face flushed with fury. "You're a dead man. You think this changes anything?" "They'll dig through this in minutes." "Maybe," Hard Apache said. His eyes were ice. "But you'll be dead seconds from now. And a dead boss means unpaid hands. How long will they dig then?" The woman stepped forward again, this time pulling the heavy Colt from her skirt. Her hands were steady now. The fear was still there, but it was a sharp, clear thing, honed into purpose. She pointed the gun not at Cutter, but in the general direction of the blocked entrance. Her job was to watch for the first sign of a man coming through the rubble. Cutter looked from the unwavering rifle to the woman's determined face, and for the first time a crack appeared in his certainty. He was a man who dealt in leverage, and his leverage had just vanished. He was alone, facing a man who had nothing to lose, and a woman who had everything to fight for. "You won't kill me in cold blood," Cutter blustered, but the edge was gone from his voice. "You're right," Hard Apache said. "I'll give you a choice, same one you gave her. You can walk away, or you can die here for a patch of dirt. Your call?" The sounds of digging came from the other side of the rock fall, frantic and angry. They had minutes, maybe less. Cutter's mind raced, his eyes darting. He could call their bluff. He could try to rush Hard Apache. But the look in the frontiersman's eyes told him it was no bluff. This was the end of the road. His greed warred with a survival instinct he hadn't needed to use in 20 years. He thought of his ranch, his money, all of it meaningless if he was bleeding out on this godforsaken rock. All right, he spat, the word bitter as poison. All right? You win this hand. Not good enough, Hard Apache said. You yell down to them. You tell them to back off, to mount up and ride. You tell them the deal is off. You do it now. Snarling with impotent rage, Cutter turned toward the blocked entrance. Boys, he shouted. Hold fast. Stop digging. The sound ceased. Boss, you okay? I'm fine, Cutter lied, the words tasting like ash. We've reached an understanding. Stand down, mount up. We're leaving. A confused murmur came from the other side. Boss, we got him pinned. You heard me. Cutter roared, his voice regaining some of its old command, fueled now by humiliation and fear. Ride back to the ranch, now, that's an order. Silence. Then the slow, reluctant sounds of men moving, grumbling, the jingle of tack. The threat of an unpaid wage was a powerful thing. Without Cutter alive to pay them, the fight was pointless. Hard Apache kept the rifle steady. You're going with them. You walk down that path ahead of us. You try anything, she will shoot you. He glanced at the woman. She met his look and nodded, her grip tightening on the pistol. She would do it. To be free, she would do it. They moved as a strange, tense procession. Cutter first, his hands half raised, his back stiff with fury. The woman followed, the pistol aimed at his back, her eyes wide but focused. Hard Apache came last, his rifle covering them both, his gaze sweeping the path ahead and the canyon below. They stepped over the fresh rubble. Below, the hired guns were indeed mounted, but they hadn't ridden out. They were clustered, watching, their rifles still in hand, unsure. Seeing his men, Cutter's courage flickered. He slowed. You'll never make it, the minute you're in the open. Keep walking, Hard Apache said, his voice leaving no room. They reached the canyon floor. The hired guns watched, a wall of suspicion and weaponry. The air was thick with the potential for a bloody disaster. Hard Apache stopped, keeping Cutter between them and the riders. Your boss made a deal, he announced, his voice carrying in the quiet. He rides out, you ride out. Any man who stays, any man who follows, answers to me. And I'm a lot harder to kill than he is. He looked at Cutter. Get on your horse. Scarred and seething, Cutter walked to his bay and hauled himself into the saddle. He looked down at Hard Apache and the woman, his face a mask of pure hate. This isn't over. It is for you, Hard Apache said, and there was a finality in the words that even Cutter couldn't ignore. That's spring land. You touch it, you send anyone for her, I won't come for your hired guns. I'll come for you, in your house, in your bed. You'll never sleep sound again. Now ride. For a long moment, Cutter held his gaze, trying to find a crack, a weakness. He found none. Only a promise of an endless personal war he knew, in his gut, he would not win. With a final, venomous glance at the woman, he yanked his horse's head around and spurred it hard toward the north. After a heartbeat of hesitation, his men followed, a cloud of dust marking their retreat. The woman's arm slowly lowered, the pistol feeling like it weighed 100 pounds. She watched until the dust settled, until the canyon was silent again except for the wind. The sudden absence of danger was so profound it felt like a physical shock. Her knees buckled, and she sat down hard on the ground, a sob of sheer relief catching in her throat. Hard Apache stood watch for a long time, ensuring the retreat was real. Finally, he uncocked his rifle and slung it over his shoulder. He walked over and offered her a hand. She took it, her own hand small and trembling in his rough grasp. He pulled her to her feet. They won't be back, he said. It wasn't a question. She shook her head, wiping her face with her sleeve. No, he's a bully. Bullies don't fight when the cost gets too high. She looked up at him, the man who was no longer just Hard Apache, but her unlikely savior. What now? He looked around the canyon, then back toward the high, hidden cleft. Now you get to choose, he said. Really choose. The railroad is that way. There are towns, a new life. You can have it, he paused. Or there's a cabin, north of here. On good land, has a strong roof and a clean creek, needs some work. Could use someone who's good with numbers to make it a proper place. He didn't look at her as he said it, his gaze on the distant horizon. The offer hung in the air, fragile as a spider's web. He was offering a share of his solitude, a corner of his hard-won peace. She thought of the railroad, of strange towns and strange people, of looking over her shoulder forever. Then she thought of the silent understanding in the cave, the shared watch in the cliff, the way he had given her back her own will. She thought of a cabin with a strong roof. "I think," she said slowly, a real, true smile touching her lips for the first time since her father died. "I'd like to see that cabin," a nod almost too slight to see. "All right, then." They collected his horse from where it was hidden in the side canyon. He helped her up behind the saddle, and they turned not east toward escape, but north toward a future they would have to build from scratch, on their own terms. The desert stretched before them, vast and unforgiving, but for the first time it didn't feel like an enemy. It felt like a blank page. The hard Apache had found more than a bride in trouble. He had found a partner for the quiet that comes after the storm. And the banker's daughter, who had refused to be a key or a prize, had finally unlocked a door to a life that was truly her own.